Chapter 7: Food Safety. Explanation. The food safety issue in India is increasingly gaining momentum and is protected by various laws. This chapter helps the factory to move towards compliance with several Indian food safety legislations. Food safety is a growing issue worldwide, and it relates to the presence of foodborne hazards in food at the point of consumption. Adequate control throughout the food chain is essential because food safety hazards can occur at any stage in the chain. The Food Safety and Standards Act 2006 aims to establish a single reference point for all matters relating to food safety and standards by moving from multi-level, multi-departmental control to a single line of command. Code Requirement 7.1. A standard operating procedure for the processing of tea as well as its packing, dispatch and storage shall be developed. The intent. Defining standard operating procedures for processing of tea should be encouraged to bring consistency while processing, packing, dispatch and storage of tea. A record-keeping process helps in due diligence and acts as evidence of implementation. What you should do to meet the code requirement. 1. Document the process for primary production and processing of black, green and white tea, etc. 2. Document measures to monitor and reduce, eliminate potential food safety hazards. 3. Define standard operating procedures for receiving raw materials, storage, processing, packing and dispatch of finished goods. 4. While defining procedure, consideration should be given to any specific legal requirements and best industry practices. 5. Define the specification, acceptance criteria or process control parameters for raw materials, packing materials and finished products. 6. Document procedure for good manufacturing practices like buildings and facilities, infrastructure requirements, cleaning and sanitation, personal hygiene, pest control, training, medical policy, waste handling and management, etc. 7. All documents to be updated and revised from time to time by the authorized persons. The records that must be maintained. 1. Records of receiving, storage, processing, packaging and dispatch. 2. Records of inspection. 3. Records of non-conformances and corrective action taken. 4. Records of external lab reports. And 5. Records for showing adherence to PRPs. Code Requirement 7.2. A mandatory criteria point. Display boards with signs and instructions, do's and don'ts on basic hygiene and food safety such as washing hands after meals, etc. are visually displayed in all facilities. The intent. Basic hygiene and food safety in the food industry is of paramount importance. The lack of both may lead to contamination through the food handlers. A good communication mechanism is required to enhance the awareness levels of the food handlers. Visual display helps in development of good hygiene and implementing such practices. So this is what you should do to meet the code requirement. 1. Display signages and food safety instructions such as washing hands after meals, restrictions on use of jewelry, use of hair nets in tea processing area, etc. Advantage points in the factory so that the workers can see and put them into practice. 2. Signs and notices should be picture-based and in the local language. 3. Place signages and posters prominently at the point of use. Records and documents. List of signages and instructions. Optional effective communication through signages is intended. However, a comprehensive list may help the organization to maintain signage in future. Code Requirement 7.3. A mandatory criteria point. The workers should wear clean clothes, cover their head, and wear clean slippers, shoes dedicated for factory work. No worker with an infection should be allowed to work in the processing facilities. The intent. Lack of cleanliness, unhygienic practices, and communicable diseases act as a carrier contaminating agent for food. It is essential to control biological contamination possibilities from food handlers. So how do you meet the code requirement? 1. Identify areas where biological physical contamination can happen through food handlers. 2. Provide workers with clean clothes like aprons, footwear, caps or scarves to cover the head. 3. Provide a change room with lockers to keep their belongings. 4. Provide workers with facilities to clean their clothes. 5. Prohibit workers in the processing areas from wearing jewelry and other accessories that may lead to physical contamination. 6. Ensure that visitors too wear aprons, footwear, caps or scarves in the tea processing areas. 7. Identify and prohibit workers suffering from infectious diseases from entering the processing areas. Code Requirement 7.4. Smoking, eating, spitting and chewing is not allowed in the processing area. The intention is to reduce the chances of physical, chemical and biological contamination. Do the following to meet the code requirement. 1. Ban smoking, eating, chewing and spitting in the processing area. 2. Make workers aware of this. 3. Put up posters and signs on no smoking, spitting, eating and chewing. 4. Provide separate areas away from the processing area for eating and food storage in order to avoid cross-contamination. Records and documents you should keep. Posters, signs on prohibition of smoking, spitting, eating and chewing. Code Requirement 7.5, a mandatory criteria point. Toilet and hand wash facilities with soap are easily accessed within the factory. Toilets are always clean and do not open directly into product handling areas. The intent: sanitary facilities are to be implemented considering the food safety requirement. Personal hygiene is to be kept in mind to avoid contamination from food handlers. This is what you do to meet the code requirement. 1. Equip toilets with sufficient water, hand washing and drying facilities. 2. Provide liquid soap in the toilets. 3. Keep toilets clean. And 4. See to it that toilets do not open directly into the tea processing area and are kept separate. You must maintain these records and documents. Cleaning schedule and cleaning records. Check for sample in reference materials. Code Requirement 7.6. The factory keeps processing and storage facilities, walls, floor, windows, etc. clean, well maintained and waste free to avoid contamination. The facility should have good air circulation with extraction fans in dust-prone areas and sufficient light in sorting areas. The intent is to minimize the chances of physical contamination in the tea processing area. Measures need to be taken to ensure clean walls, floors and windows. Process to meet the code requirement. 1. Factory walls, floors, windows and machineries are to be cleaned and maintained on a regular basis so that the area is dust-free. 2. Sufficient air changes needs to be done to avoid suspended dust from falling into processed tea. 3. Sufficient illumination has to be provided, especially in the sorting areas, so that contamination in any form can be identified and rectified. Records and documents. Cleaning schedule and cleaning records. Check for sample in reference materials. Code Requirement 7.7, a mandatory criteria point. Light bulbs and anything above tea or packaging materials are safe or protected, covered in order to prevent contamination when broken. The intent: to avoid and prevent physical contamination, light bulbs and other materials are protected and covered. The process to meet the code requirement. 1. Light bulbs and any other material located in the tea processing area for tea as well as packaging material should be properly guarded and closed to prevent contamination from broken pieces of glass. 2. Preferably, light bulbs and other materials should not be placed above food processing lines. Code Requirement 7.8, a mandatory criteria point. All equipments in direct contact with tea, such as milling table, machineries, fermentation tray, are disinfected regularly with water, steam, or any safe disinfectant, food grade, to prevent contamination from microbe and any other contaminants. The intent is to prevent contamination from microbes and any other contaminants arising out of the contact of tea with machineries by disinfecting. To meet the code requirement, you should: 1. Identify machineries which come in direct contact with processed tea. 2. There should be a schedule of cleaning and monitoring. Factories may develop a cleaning procedure. 3. The machineries in direct contact with tea, like rolling table, CTC machine and fermentation tray, are regularly cleaned and disinfected with water, steam or any other disinfectants. Keep a record of cleaning schedule. Code Requirement 7.9. If water or steam is in direct contact with tea during processing, the factory ensures that the water is clean. The water testing should be done at least once a year and records available. The intention: water is an important aspect in tea processing and cleaning. Water should be clean and only potable water should be used. Process to meet the code requirement. 1. An adequate supply of potable water should be made available in tea processing. 2. Potable water is to be tested annually. 3. Where it is necessary to store water, storage facilities should be adequately designed and maintained to prevent contamination. Where water filters are used, they should be regularly changed or effectively maintained. Keep a record of water test reports. Code Requirement 7.10, a mandatory criteria point. A designated place is available to keep disinfectants and other cleaning materials separated from the processing area to prevent contamination. The intent: a separate place for keeping disinfectants and other cleaning materials to avoid cross-contamination. Process to meet the code requirement. 1. Identify a separate area for disinfectants and other cleaning materials away from the tea processing area. 2. Identification and MSDS for the cleaning agent needs to be in place in the area where such materials are kept. Records: MSDS of a disinfectant, cleaning agent. Code Requirement 7.11. Cleaning material, lubricants and other substances with direct tea contact must be approved as food grade. The intention is only those cleaning materials, lubricants and other substances which come in contact with tea that are approved by Tea Board and other government authorities can be used in tea processing areas. Process to meet the code requirement: 1. Identify the cleaning materials, lubricants and other substances used in the factory that comes in contact with tea. 2. Identified materials and substances should be approved by Tea Board and other government authorities. Keep records of inventory approved materials, lubricants, cleaning material and other substances. Code Requirement 7.12, a mandatory criteria point. Correct measures are taken in processing and storage area control and prevent contamination from animals, rats, birds, insects, etc. The intention is to avoid contamination arising out of animals through adequate pest control mechanisms. What you should do to meet the code requirement: 1. Identify the potential pests in the tea processing and storage areas. 2. Decide methods, schedule and control mechanisms to control the pests. 3. Seal drains, holes and other potential pest access points in processing and storage areas. 4. Storage practices should be designed to minimize pest infestation. 5. Develop and implement a pest monitoring program. 6. Pest monitoring program needs to include the placing of detectors and traps in key locations to identify pest activity. Records that must be maintained are: pest control and monitoring plan, records of pest control activity. Code Requirement 7.13, a mandatory criteria point. The factory must implement a documented procedure to prevent the risk of physical contamination like plastic, metal, glass, wood fracture in processing areas. The intention is to have a procedure to identify the risks arising out of physical contamination, and such risks are identified and handled by qualified personnel. Process to meet the code requirement: 1. Identify the hazards arising out of physical contaminants like plastic, metal, glass, wood fracture, as well as the loose identification tags used for maintenance of traceability. 2. Conduct a risk assessment which includes hazard identification, risk evaluation and risk analysis. 3. Develop a system to prevent risk arising out of the physical contaminants like metal, glass, plastic in the processing area. 4. A documented procedure is required to take care of point number 1, 2 and 3. 5. A competent person based on education, experience, skill and training has to be deployed in the factory to take care of the above. 6. Validation, checking of finished and in-process tea to assess the level of physical contamination if any. 7. Factory should hold regular meetings with farmers or farmer groups to discuss the prevention of physical contamination. Keep the following records: Procedure for risk assessment. Records of validation checking of finished and in-process tea. Minutes of the meetings with farmers. Code Requirements 7.14, a mandatory criteria point. The factory is able to provide evidence on residue testing done twice a year in compliance with requirements stipulated by the Plant Protection Code. The verified facility will promptly notify the buyers if the sold tea appears to exceed the maximum residue limits. The intention is to analyze tea to evaluate the level of residual chemical as advised by Tea Board and FSSAI. Such analysis is done to ensure that the levels do not exceed the maximum residual limit. This is what you should do to meet the code requirement. 1. Do residue testing twice a year through approved NABL accredited labs. Such tests can also be done by the buyers. 2. Results of residue testing should be within acceptable maximum residual level. 3. Record and maintain the test results. 4. Devise a mechanism to promptly notify the buyer if residue testing shows that the sold tea has exceeded the maximum residue limit. 5. Factory should hold regular meetings with farmers or farmer groups to discuss the controlled use of pesticide to meet the requirement of MRL. These records must be maintained. Minutes of the meeting, residue testing report, methods of informing buyers when maximum residual limits are exceeded, and limits as per FSSAI. Code Requirement 7.15. A cleaning and sanitation program shall be drawn up and observed, and the record thereof shall be properly maintained, which shall indicate specific areas to be cleaned, cleaning frequency and cleaning procedure to be followed, including equipment and materials to be used for cleaning. Equipment used in manufacturing will be cleaned and sterilized at set frequencies. The intent: the factory must maintain their premises at a high standard of cleanliness. This includes the ceilings, walls, drains, floors, fixtures, fittings and equipment, as well as those parts of vehicles that are used to transport food. The standard of cleanliness must ensure that there is no accumulation of garbage, recycled matter, food waste, dirt, grease, or other visible matter. Processing food using dirty equipment will transfer contamination and possibly harmful bacteria. The process you must follow to meet the code requirement: 1. Maintain the food premises in a clean condition at all times, free of dirt, grease, and other visible matter. 2. All areas like ceiling, floor, walls, drains, fixtures and fittings, and equipment should be cleaned and sanitized at periodic intervals. 3. All food transport vehicles should be kept clean and sanitized at all times. 4. Ensure that no cleaning happens in presence of open tea. 5. Keep cleaning chemicals away from food storage areas. 6. Educate staff on correct cleaning and sanitizing procedures and provide regular checks on cleaning carried out, and instruct staff where required. Maintain these records meticulously. 1. Cleaning and sanitation schedule indicating frequency, method, dosage of chemical and responsibility. 2. Cleaning and sanitation records. 3. MSDS for cleaning chemicals and their display in respective areas. 4. Display of cleaning and sanitation instructions in respective areas. 5. Validation, microbiological records for effective sanitation.